Hello and welcome to this question and answer session. We're going to be answering some questions on lower back pain. So these are questions that I've had on previous videos, and where they're obviously useful for the person that's written and asked the question. After reviewing them, these are actually quite useful questions to answer for the, let's just say, the wider public. So what we're going to do, I've got 7 questions. I've also got some notes up on my screen here because I do have a tendency to, or I can certainly go off on tangents, so I want to try and keep myself as much on point as I can. So we've got 7 questions. What I will do is I will timestamp the questions down in the description. So question number 1 is, what's the best exercise to prevent low back pain? Question 2, can you suggest any other exercises besides the bird dog? Number 3, how are weak glutes responsible for lower back pain and how to activate them? Please suggest good and effective stretches that complement core exercises. Question 5, many fitness experts recommend spine mobility exercises such as cat-cow, forward bending, backward bending. Do you recommend such exercises? And what are your views on these exercises? Question 6, how many times per day and for how many minutes each time should you do this back extension exercise for disc bulges? And question 7, what do you think about controlled hanging toes to bar? It's flexion exercise, but under spinal distraction. So that's a specific exercise. So I'll timestamp all these in the description below, so you can click one to that you want to listen to, or you can just listen to the whole thing all the way through. So if we get started, what's the best exercise to prevent lower back pain? Well, this sort of is a bit of a multi-dimensional exercise, so you kind of first of all got to pick apart the question. With regards to preventing lower back pain, I don't think there's any way of preventing lower back pain, but I do say there is a way of minimising risk, and the more risk you can minimise, the more chance you have of not having lower back pain. So I would never really say that any person is 100% going to never have lower back pain, because I think that's too unrealistic. There are too many causes of lower back pain to say that someone's never going to get it. It's very hard to do because it's just everyday life type of stuff that can build up and in some respects turn into lower back pain. So that's sort of like the first part of it, is we've got to think about minimizing risk. And the second part of it is, what's the best exercise? Well, again, I would say there's not necessarily one best exercise for lower back pain. It will depend on the person's lower back pain, and the type of lower back pain is or will determine the type of exercise that they can and can't do. So if we now that we've broken the question up and understand a little bit more of the landscape about lower back pain, what we can then do is start talking about what are the best exercises to minimise risk of lower back pain. Now, with regards to sort of the basics and talking about the fundamentals, and over the years of training people with lower back pain or to overcome lower back pain, there are some common threads that come up in most people. So that there are exercises that I use for most people, and that would be the plank, the side plank, the bird dog, and the shoulder bridge. And there are reasons that I choose or use those exercises. They use multiple muscles around the core. They require you to brace. They require you to focus on your breathing. So these are, in a sense, okay, they are the exercises, but there are underlying core skills that you need to learn that go with it, and those are things like bracing, breathing. With regards to the bird dog and the shoulder bridge, you've got a degree of joint awareness, so you have to understand the hip hinge, you have to understand maintaining a neutral spine whilst moving the hips and shoulders, so they come up in within the bird dog and the shoulder bridge. So there are these underlying skills that you also require. So not only are they good for sort of the musculature, they're also good for how your brain connects to your muscles and how aware you are of what your body's doing. Because if we then go to look at what are the causes of lower back pain, well, as a general rule, it's the improper use of the spine and it's too much use of the spine. So basically, people aren't moving properly, and they aren't moving properly enough. So they're doing too much improper movement. So that basically just increases the wear and tear on the spine, which then manifests itself as a back injury. Now that could be a disc bulge, it could be a disc herniation, it could be a facet joint inflammation, it could be some sort of compression injury. So there are many different injuries to the spine, but as a general rule, they don't happen in one traumatic moment. They happen over a period of time with lots of little movement errors, as I would describe it. So as these movement errors add up and build up, then eventually the straw breaks the camel's back and an injury occurs. So these core skills that you learn within these 4 exercises are the foundation to proper movement. Because once you've learnt the things like breathing, bracing, hip hinge, neutral spine, your joint awareness, your joint mobility and stability, once you understand that and you know where you are, you've then got a foundation to build good quality movement on top. And then that would be the next thing, would then be to learn that movement, learn proper lifting, proper carrying, proper walking, proper pushing and pulling, proper rotation, proper getting up out of a seat or out of bed or out of off the floor, all those different things. So when we talk about the best exercises, it's developing it in that way, but I'm using those 4 exercises not only as exercises as in their traditional use, but I'm also asking the person to learn those core skills, which they can then extrapolate and expand out into proper movement. Because when we move properly, when we're lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, we still need to be breathing. We still need to brace the abdominals. We still need to be aware of what our joints are doing. So another exercise that I'll use with the bird dog, if someone struggles with it. Now the bird dog, if you don't know what it is, it's on all fours and you extend your opposite arm and your opposite leg. Now, if you do that incorrectly and you lift your arm and leg up too high, you can create a big arch in the spine. Now, what we want to be able to do is maintain that neutral spine whilst you're moving your hip and your shoulder. So it's learning that neutral spine position with those 2 joint movements. So one way I would progress people to that, if they are struggling with that, is just get them to move one limb at a time. So just moving the shoulder without getting any sort of shoulder elevation or rotation through the thoracic spine. So learning that position. They can then log that. So then when they come up into a standing position and they're asked to put their arms over their head, they know the type of range of movement that they've got. Because that's a big part of it. Because one thing that I find is I will get people to do a big movement and then I will ask them, where could you feel that working? And most of the time they will say, I was just trying to complete the movement. So they weren't thinking about what was my shoulder doing, what was my hip doing. They were just thinking, I need to get the weight from there to there like I was showed. They aren't thinking about bracing, they aren't thinking about breathing and all those different core skills. So what I'm trying to do with those 4 exercises is develop those skills so then they can expand out into different movements. So then when you are lifting a weight from the floor or rotating a weight, and I ask, where could you feel that working in the body? How could you feel the hips working, the shoulders working? Could you feel the tummy was braced? how was your breathing? They'll be able to go, yes, I could focus on all those. I don't think I got the breathing quite right, or I felt my brace loosening at a certain point, and you can then sort of develop it. But it's learning whole movement, but you've got to break it up into parts and then knit it back together. What a lot of professionals can find themselves doing is trying to learn whole movement as whole movement, and they don't break it down and chunk it up so a person can process it in their brain, because a lot of people they find it quite hard to process large movements, and they can't necessarily coordinate their whole body through that. So what we have to do is break that movement up, and then you knit it back together, and then what you find is that whole movement becomes improved. So that's, I guess, the long answer to what's the best exercise to prevent lower back pain. It's very much thinking about building quality movement, but also building those quality core skills. And then as those core skills then start to develop out, you can then start to develop the exercises. You can add progressions to the plank, side plank, bird dog, shoulder bridge, get people up using a cable machine, rotating, doing chops, reverse chops, kneeling exercises, half kneeling exercises. But you have to start from that fundamental point, so you can build those core skills in before things get too complicated, so they can't focus on anything else bar the exercise, if that makes sense. So that's what I would recommend, and that's what I would recommend. That's what I do recommend for people to reduce their risk of lower back pain. But first, you have to understand the back pain. So that would come before that, before you could even put those in place. You have to understand the back pain, so you can then understand where you can take the exercises and where you can take the movement, and certain things that you can start doing and certain things you can't start doing. So again, if you have any additional questions based on the answer that I've given, please just stick it in the comment section below. That will be the same throughout all these questions, so I'll mention that after each question. Pop it in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer them in the comment section. What I'll probably end up doing is another video like this to sort of expand on this conversation that I'm having. So yeah, hopefully that's been helpful for that question. So what we'll now do is we'll go on to question 2. So question 2 is, can you suggest any other exercises beside the bird dog? So again, it's very similar to what I talked about in question number 1. There are a lot of exercises that I can recommend. It would just depend on the back pain. So if it was just any one exercise, so if you were just doing the bird dog, the first place I would go, much like question 1, would be the plank, the side plank, and the shoulder bridge, to build those up. Because with the plank, you get let's just say the anterior aspects of the abdominal wall. The side plank does the lateral aspects, left and right. And then you've got the shoulder bridge, which is then doing the glutes. And then you've got the bird dog, which is doing, a number of things. You've got the stability of the hip, spine, and shoulder. And then you've got the coordination of that. You've got the mild brace. So you get quite a lot. You've also got latissimus dorsi activation as well. You've got the thoracic spine extensors. They'll be activated as well. So you get quite a lot that comes along with that. And when I say the plank, it doesn't necessarily mean doing a full plank, because again, a lot of people with back pain, they might not be able to do a full plank or a full side plank. So you could then go down onto the knees to make that a little bit easier for them. And when you're holding a plank or a side plank, it's also best to do it in little blocks of 8 to 10 seconds with a 5 second break in between. So then it just gives the muscles an opportunity to rest. So what that means is, if you were asked to hold a plank for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, whatever it is, a lot of people will get lower back pain, or get a pain within their lower back during that exercise. Now, that could be there for a number of reasons. So let's just say that happens at 25 seconds. So they get the starting of an ache in their lower back at 25 seconds. Well, what we can do is, and something that I find very regularly, is that if I break that if I break that plank up into 3 10-second blocks with a 5 second break in between, they're able to complete that set. So that's essentially 30 seconds of a plank, but with 2 5-second breaks in between. So it's that's helping them reduce their risk of lower back pain. So just putting it into blocks helps them do a 30-second plank rather than 25-second plank with a little bit of back pain, if that makes sense. So those would be the type of sort of starting points with regards to sort of the best exercises. And then, as I mentioned before, depending on the lower back pain that you have and depending on the stage at which you are in your rehabilitation will depend on what variations you can use. So let's just say slightly more advanced, you might use, well, it doesn't have to be advanced, you could use this instead of a side plank, would be the Pallof press. Now, you wouldn't use this if someone was feeling pain because of what would be described as lateral shear. So if you're looking at the front of my spine here, the Pallof press wants to do that with the vertebra. So it wants to sort of pull it to the right, or it wants to pull it to the left because of the nature of the exercise. So if you get someone whose pain is aggravated by that type of shear, then you wouldn't give them this exercise. But if they're pain-free whilst they're doing it, it can be a good option instead of the side plank, because what some people can find with the side plank is that their shoulder or their arm fatigues before their torso, so they find it hard to hold themselves up. So this can be a good starting point to help them access the obliques and the lateral aspects of their torso. You've also got things like carrying exercises. So a suitcase carry is a very good exercise for helping the lateral aspects of the torso and the spine stability that brings. So you've got quadratus lumborum, the obliques, the glute medius, glute medius, glute minimus that are involved in that. A little bit more advanced, you could use a big gym ball and you could do like a stir the pot exercise. Or if people struggle with stir the pot, you could do a plank on the ball with sort of a shoulder flexion and extension type movement to, get a little bit more of the core. But again, you want them to experience that without any pain. So it very much depends on, as I mentioned, the stage of their rehabilitation and the type of lower back pain that they have. So that's kind of what you're choosing those exercises based on. Again, if you have any questions about this answer, please do just pop it in the comment section below. Just reference the question that I'm asking. Just say, so based on question 2, you mentioned this. What about this? And then I can go about answering that question. Question number 3: how are weak glutes responsible for lower back pain, and how to activate them? Well, your glutes aren't necessarily responsible for lower back pain, but you need your glutes working correctly to be able to, again, minimize risk of your lower back pain happening. For the very basic reason that they help protect your lower back. They can absorb shock. They can, let's just say, minimize the hamstrings from overactivating and minimize the lower back muscles from being overactive. So an example of this is quite a while ago now. I had a client with very tight hamstrings. We didn't stretch the hamstrings at all. All we did was activated the glutes. Once we started activating the glutes, the hamstrings just naturally started relaxing. So when we did an active straight leg raise, she could go further. It was in some respects, it was kind of that simple. So they can help relax those muscles. They can help relax muscles of the lower back. If you've also got overactive muscles of the lower back, which can include the spinal extensors or the lumbar extensors, and the psoas, the hip flexor, that can create a degree of compression around those lumbar vertebra. So it's very much, if you can relax that, you can also get a bit of decompression within the spine as well. So your glutes help protect your lower back by absorbing shock and also creating that degree of decompression because the muscles are relaxing. The other thing they do is they create movement, or again, as long as you're moving correctly and activating the muscles properly, you start to move from the hips a lot more. So what that basically means is if the hips aren't moving or hinging correctly, what generally happens is the joint above and joint below will overcompensate. So that's the knee and the lower back. So for example, if I want you to keep and maintain a neutral spine, and then I get you to hinge at the hip to lift something up so you can lift from the hip, if you can't get all the way down to that object with a neutral spine, you will either round your back or you will bend your knees. So you are then overusing, or overusing is not the right word, you are using too much of the knee and using too much of the lower back to compensate for the hips not being able to move. So what we really need to be able to do is get the hips moving more effectively, and then what that can do, that then just takes the pressure away from the back having to round and you having to bend your knees as much. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't bend your knees, because there is some use for bending your knees, but it's just using it within that example to highlight that if the hips can't move, somewhere else has to pick up that slack, and it's generally the joint above and the joint below, which is for the hips, the knee joint, and the lumbar spine. So we have to be able to create that good quality hip movement, which if we can start getting a better quality hip movement, we can then start to get a better quality muscle activation that comes with that. Now, that does take some training, so that you can then use the side plank, the shoulder bridge, and the bird dog 4 to start activating the hips a little bit more correctly. You can then use just a traditional hip hinge type movement with a stick or a broom handle up the back to get that sliding smooth movement through the hips. So there's all those different types of things that sort of build towards having a good quality glutes to be able to improve, essentially your lower back pain or minimize your risk of it happening in the future. So again, if you've got any questions based on any of those answers that I've just given on question number 3, again, please do stick it in the comment section below. Again, I'll try and answer it as best I can. But as I said it before, I will probably end up adding it to another Q&A session like this. Question number 4 is, please suggest good and effective stretches that complement core exercises. So, as we've mentioned, core exercises, plank, side plank, shoulder bridge, bird dog, Pallof press, stir the pot, plank on a ball, kneeling plank, half kneeling exercises, kneeling exercises. So what stretches are going to complement those most? Now, you've heard me talk about joint above, joint below, so that is where I would go. So if we're talking about the torso, so we're talking about the abdominals, the abdominal wall, I would go the joint below, which would be the hips, and the joint above, which would be the upper back. So we're talking about hip stretches. So I'd be stretching hip flexors. So the psoas muscle would be a muscle to stretch. And with regards to that, it does attach obviously to the lumbar spine, but it goes right through the pelvis, and it has a big influence on how the core works. So what we want to be doing is we want to be not only creating a strong core, but good moving hips, because good moving hips and a good moving upper back, that's going to help the core out, because as I've mentioned before, it's going to minimize the risk of any compensations. It's going to minimize the risk of any energy leaks if it's a more sort of performance type goal or core exercise type goal. So if we can get our hips moving, then that's going to be that much more effective, and that's also going to help the performance of that exercise and the muscle activation that comes along with that. So other muscles or other stretches to be doing are stretches for the adductors on the inside of the leg. So we've got the psoas, which is a hip flexor, so any type of hip flexor stretches. You've also got rectus femoris, which is another type of hip flexor stretch. Adductors, you've got glute stretches. With regards to the thoracic spine, we would be thinking about things like spinal rotation, spinal extension. You've also got sort of scapular movement, if you will, because that then joins into the shoulder, and you could go into some shoulder stretches if you wanted to do that. So any of those types of stretches are going to be beneficial, because what we are essentially doing, we are taking our body towards the way it wants to function. So we're able to get the body moving more correctly, or move it towards that, which is only going to minimize any risk of injury in the future. So with regards to effective stretches, go back to stretches below, the joint below and the joint above, and stretches for that. With regards to the thoracic spine above, it basically does those two movements, which is extension. You could say flexion, but most people will find themselves in flexion if they're sort of hunched over. So it's extension and then rotation to the left and rotation to the right. So you would be focusing on stretches that encourage that, whilst also trying to protect the position of the lumbar spine. So you would try and keep the lumbar spine in the neutral position whilst you're stretching, because again, if you've got a stiff upper spine, what you will tend to do is you'll compensate by overextending the lumbar spine, because your thoracic spine won't move. So it's being able to maintain the posture of the lumbar spine whilst you not only stretch your hips and also stretch your upper back, because that's the most effective way of doing it. So again, got any questions about anything that I just mentioned there, please do pop the comment or the question section below. I'll do my best to answer it in the comment section, but I will probably end up doing another Q&A session and then be able to pass that on to you through video form as well, but that will be for a little bit later on. Had a little mishap with the camera, and halfway through answering question 5 it decided to stop recording, so I've discarded that one, and I'm going to obviously go back into the answer. So question 5 is many fitness experts recommend spine mobility exercises such as cat-cow, forward bending, backward bending. Do you recommend such exercises, and what are your views on these exercises? Now, if someone has back pain, it's going to depend on the back pain. Now, if they have a disc bulge or a disc herniation, let's say, and let's say it's coming out the back of the disc, or slightly to the right or the left, but essentially it's coming out the back, then I wouldn't recommend doing any forward bending exercises. I wouldn't necessarily recommend going into full flexion in the cat-cow, for the very simple reason is it's creating the injury mechanism, if that makes sense, which is essentially the pain trigger. So you're creating the pain trigger that's causing the problem. So by then recreating that, you're just giving them more pain. So it's very much, it would depend on the injury of the back or the pain of the back. If they have an extension-based pain, so if they have potentially, again, a sort of disc herniation or a disc bulge, which could also involve some facet joint inflammation or irritation, then it's not that effective to go into the back extension postures or poses. So it's very much, it will depend on the pain, because you don't want to recreate the pain. It's as simple as that. With regards to the cat-camel, it's very much, there is value in doing that movement, but it's not necessarily to go to that full flexion, full extension. If you just do mild extension flexion, you won't go to full flexion, which won't necessarily recreate that pain pattern. But what it can do is it can bring some mobility to the spine, and it can hydrate the spine, or it can remove toxins and sort of bring nutrition to the spine, essentially. So there are some good uses for it, but as I've mentioned in the other questions, it will depend on the person's lower back pain. Now, with all of that said, if they've got a healthy spine, and they have to be honest about a healthy spine, because some of the people that I speak to with back pain, they will, or I will ask them a series of questions. I will identify that they have an extension-based pain or a flexion-based pain, for example, and then I'll recommend removing some exercises. And because they like doing the exercises so much, they will just want to keep doing it, and they'll sort of dismiss, oh, no, the back pain's, it's not that much of a problem, so I'll continue doing it. So there are those, let's just say, like that sort of personality type out there that will just want to keep doing the exercise. Another example would be yoga. Now again, yoga isn't inherently a bad thing. It just, again, it depends on the person's body. The blanket term that gets used with yoga is that it helps overcome lower back pain. That's not necessarily true, because it depends on the back pain. I work with plenty of people that do yoga, and they have disc bulges, disc hernia. These have been shown on MRI scans. We know the cause of the pain, or the cause of the injury, is excessive spine flexion. And when they go into certain postures or poses, they have excessive spine flexion. So it's to take that into consideration when doing it. So it's very much just thinking about it in that way. If someone has a perfectly healthy spine, they're in no pain, not that they would have an MRI scan, but if they can demonstrate it's a healthy spine, then you have the ability to flex forward, extend back, so on and so forth. But for most people, because and this is sort of, I guess, how I rationalise it, the statistics that come out are, in the Western world, that 80% of the population will experience lower back pain at some point in their life. That's sort of what the statistic, or that's how it reads anyway. So if 80% are going to experience it, but we don't know who that is because we don't have X-rays or MRI scans to show that, but if 80% are going to experience that, then there's good cause not to go into those postures or positions, because just because they're feeling it at the moment doesn't mean they're not going to feel it in the future. So my thinking is just, in some respects, eliminate that part of the risk and just don't do them. Or if you do yoga, or if you do those type of exercises which could cause flexion of the lumbar spine, then make sure you go to a range of movement where you're just flexing at the hip and then not at the spine. So again, like, yoga isn't inherently a bad thing. Yoga is a very good thing. It just depends on, how the person's doing it and how the person is being taught to do it. Which then comes down to the level of education of the individual doing it and the level of education of the person teaching it, because they need to understand, their lower back. They need to understand if it's painful or not, if it's healthy or not, so on and so forth. And then you can then make a good decision as to whether they can do certain exercises. But my thinking is, if most of the population are going to experience low back pain, and most of lower back pain is created from poor movement or flexion, extension of the spine, then it's probably just useful not to go into those positions. Learn how to use your body correctly, move from the hips and the shoulders, and in some respects the thoracic spine, and using the scapula to get the movement that you need, maintain the proper posture of the lumbar spine, and use that as your guide to how you move. Now, there's going to be times where you flex your spine. I'm not saying be a robot and never ever flex your spine ever in life, because there are going to be times in everyday life where you have to do that. So it's taking that into consideration. But if we can maintain the proper posture of the spine and we can exercise in that way, every time we do that, and again, this is sort of a metaphor and an example, we're adding a coin in our lower back pain account. Every time we move out of that posture, we're taking a coin away. So what we want to try and do is, during any sort of formal exercise, and as much as we can during everyday life, is build up that lower back pain account with coins. So then when we go through everyday life, or that time where we have to flex the spine, when we take one away, we've still got that margin for error. So pain's down here, we're up here with regards to our health, and we've got all that margin for error before pain kicks in down here. So when we do it, we only chop it down a few, and then we can build it back up. And it doesn't really affect the spine in that way. So if we can sort of take that into our lower back pain, it's going to be much more effective than just doing exercises because someone told us to do it, or they heard it was good through a social media post or a magazine article or something like that. There's a little bit more of a nuance. Depends on the individual, depends on the goal that they want to achieve, depends on the range of movement that they have, depends on the skill level of the individual and how well they can exercise and things like that. So that would be sort of my suggestion for those types of exercises, but also a little bit of education around selecting of exercises as well in general. Again, if you have any questions on that answer that I've given, pop it in the comment section below. Just reference the question so I understand where you're coming from. And again, I'll try and answer it as best I can in the comments. Otherwise, I'll stick it in another Q&A session like this, which will probably come out next month. I'll probably try to end up doing one a month or something like that, but we'll see. Question number 6. How many times per day and for how many minutes each time should I do the the spinal extension to help with lower back pain or with the disc herniation? So this was a video that I did where I was showing people it's not really an exercise, it's just a posture or position you go into to help with disc herniations or disc bulges. So basically, you lie on your front. So if a disc bulge is coming out the back, you lie on your front and you allow gravity to allow the gel-like fluid on the inside of the disc to just sort of go back into the disc using gravity. So you might stay there for a minute or two. You can so if it's aggravating your back, if you're starting to experience aches and pains in your lower back, you can go down, lie on your front, just sort of rest your forehead on your hands like that. You can start in that position. So you go into that position and you just start letting gravity do its thing with the gel-like fluid on the inside of the disc. Now that could take 30 seconds, it could take a minute, it could take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You stay there as long as you feel that you need to. With regards to extending the spine, so what you can then do is just sort of put your chin up so you gently extend the spine. Now what that's doing, as long as the fluid has started to sort of recede itself, what you can then do is extend the spine, which then creates a little bit of pressure on the back of the spine to not only use gravity, but push it back down as well, because you're squashing that part together, which is then, again, forcing it down in. So you're using gravity and that little bit of force to push it back down. Now, this came off the back of a lot of people do what's called the Mackenzie push-up, which is where you go on your front and you really try and extend your spine. Now, if you do that, that can aggravate the facet joint, or it can aggravate, if you don't let it sink through and you've still got the disc bulge, it can pinch the disc bulge and keep it there so it doesn't go back down, if that makes sense. So the first thing to do is just let it recede. The pain should start to reduce as well, so that will be helpful. And then you can go into that extension, which will help sort of push it down. You then come up, walk around, get yourself moving, and you should experience. Now, again, this isn't to say it's going to work for everyone, but it is something that can work for some people. So if you try it and it works, then you found a way of reducing your lower back pain. You found a way of managing your lower back pain if or when it gets a little bit worse. That's not to say it works for everyone, but it can work for some people, and it has worked for some people. So again, it depends on the lower back pain. I'm just trying to look at my notes here. So when your pain is increasing, use it to reduce the symptoms. Been sitting for long periods, yes. Again, if it becomes painful from sitting, you can use it as a break. So with regards to how many times a day you do it, it will partly be due to when you experience the pain. But it is just a good thing to do. If you know you have a disc bulge or a disc herniation, it can just be a good thing to do just to break up the sitting posture, so the flexed posture. It can be good just to break that up. So you could do that for 3 minutes every 45 minutes whilst you're sat down. So if you know you're going to be sat down for the morning, which might be 3 hours, just break that sitting up every 5 minutes, every 45 minutes for 3 minutes. Then you might go to the kitchen, grab a glass of water, make a cup of tea, make a cup of coffee, whatever it is, walk back into your office, and then, whatever it is. So there's that part to it as well. So it's not necessarily you have to do it in the morning, midday, and then evening. It can be used that way, but it can also be used in a way that that helps with regards to just breaking up the seated posture. When you know it's getting worse, yes, done that. Yes. So the final one is the scenarios are endless. So again, it depends on the individual. It depends on their specific type of lower back pain. And it depends on when it gets triggered and when it doesn't get triggered. So yes, that is question number 6. Again, if you've got any questions about any of that, please do pop it in the comment section below. I will do my best to answer it, but I will probably use it in another Q&A session like this next month. What do you think about controlled hanging toes to bar? It's a flexion exercise, but under spinal distraction. Now, this is a little bit more of a fitness type person's exercise. So toes to bar is you're hanging from a bar and you flick your toes up to the bar. So your arms are overhead like that, and then you flick your toes up so they essentially come up over your head and touch the bar. So your spine goes into flexion, but as he mentions there, it's under what he calls a spinal distraction. Basically, there's no load going through the spine from like a bar that's on your back. So there's no sort of compression to it. In some respects, it's more of a decompression. So there is a spinal distraction to it, or there is a low load to it. So what this basically means, again, it depends on a few things. So if the person has back pain, if they do have lower back pain, and again, it's a flexion-based pain, then it's probably not something that's going to be terribly useful for them. Yes, there is low load. So not only have you got the injury, you've got the mechanism of flexion, but load is another component of that. So if you have got a spine in flexion and it's got a high load, that is a recipe for a much quicker injury than a spine in flexion with low load, because the load, the higher load will increase the rate at which it can injure itself. So if you've got low load, then it's better than having high load. I wouldn't say it's the most effective thing to be doing, flexing the spine like that. It's very much about the load. If this person has a bad back and they've got flexion-based pain, I wouldn't do it. Yes, if it's flexion-based pain. The other thing is, does it trigger pain? If it does, again, just don't do it. And then you come on to a sort of a slightly more nuanced conversation about why are they selecting the exercise. So this generally comes from fitness-based exercise. There is no real specific sport that it will relate to, because there aren't many sports that require not only that type of movement, but also that type of what's the word? Because it's not that type of momentum-based exercise. So how you would describe a sport-specific exercise is not necessarily it replicates the movement of the sport, but does it replicate the pattern and the forces applied to that pattern. So a sprinter would be, you could use like the triple extension, which, so when they're in their blocks, they're all sort of cramped up. And then when the gun goes, they extend very quickly. So their hip extends, their knee extends, and in some respects, their sort of chest comes up as well. So is it replicating that? So you could use like a deadlift, or this is where the Olympic lifts come in, because you've got that extension. You've got extension of the hip and extension of the knee, and in some respects, extension of the thoracic spine as well. You've got the plantar flexion of the ankle as well. So is it replicating that? It's not necessarily complete, what's the word? It's not a complete, or sorry, not complete, not an exact replication of the movement, but it has those components to it in the fact that it extends the body from a scrumpled up position. So with the hanging toes to bar, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's a sports movement that requires that. So from that perspective, if it's a sports person, I would look at their sport and think, well, there's no need for that exercise. If it's just someone's fitness goal and they are competing in a competition that requires that movement, then I can understand why that movement is being done. So from that perspective, and it is a goal of the individual to get up to a certain number or perform it for a certain amount of time, because it's based on a competition that they're going for, then there's no reason to do it. But again, you have to then think, is the completing of that competition, if they have back pain that is it worth the risk of the back pain? If it is, then do it. Most sports people have injuries throughout their career. They play through injuries all the time, and they're getting short-term fixes in injections and things like that throughout their career, because their career only lasts a certain amount of time. They need to, let's just say, earn as much money as they can in that period of time, because it's a very short career. And so the risk of that pain is worth it, because they'll be able then to in a sense, live for much longer, if that makes sense. But if they're going, oh, well, my back pain isn't worth it, they're essentially reducing the amount that they get paid, if that makes sense. So there's that trade-off. But again, most people aren't in that position. So it's, in some respects, it's not really a conversation to be had with most people. But if it's a sports person that requires that, then, you have to have that conversation, because, again, most sports people, I've worked with plenty of sports people, and they're retired, and they'll come to me and they'll say, shoulder's been reconstructed, I haven't got a muscle at the front of my shoulder, or I've damaged my knee, I've had a knee replacement, or I need a knee replacement, I've got osteoarthritis at my knee, I've got back problems, I've had back all these different types of things have come from a sporting career, and we have to sort of rebuild that. But we can rebuild it. It just takes a bit of extra time, and it's essentially saying, is that worth the risk, essentially, of having to deal with that later on in life? If it is, do it. If it's not, don't. It's the easy question. And again, with all that said, if the person has a healthy spine, their training program is suitable and it's congruent with their goals, I don't see a problem with it. So when you're talking about our exercise is good or our exercise is bad, it comes with managing the management of risk and the necessity of that exercise. I have said for a very long time that many exercises are unnecessary. They are just an entertainment thing that the individual doing it might be getting a kick from, or the trainer prescribing it might be getting a kick from. It's not really doing anything for their physical health. It's certainly not doing anything for their biomechanical and joint health. It's very much just an entertainment thing, which isn't something that, yes, we need exercise to be fun. We need people to enjoy doing it for them to do it. But again, we have to weigh that up against the risk of some of these exercises of, if we have too much fun and too much enjoyment from it by just throwing all these exercises in, and then we eventually injure our client, is that a useful outcome for us as a trainer or you as an individual to do it? So we have to weigh that up, because again, there are a lot of people that say to me, well, why aren't we doing this exercise or that exercise? And then I have to explain the risk that comes along with doing that. It's balancing up that risk and thinking, right, is this a necessary thing to do? Is this going to help me 100% to get me where I want to get? If it's not, then, don't worry about it. There's plenty of other exercises that are plenty safer that we can do in its place. So hopefully that's given you a better idea of some of the answers to these questions. Hopefully it's given you a better understanding of not only how I go about answering them, but and how I think about exercise and how I think about how I coach the people that I work with, be it a fitness person or a person with lower back pain, but also hopefully it educates you in a way that you can start to, stick your hand in this pot of glue and, some of it sticks. You choose exercises slightly differently. You think about certain exercises in a different way, sort of thing. So hopefully that's been helpful. Hopefully it's given you a better idea. Hopefully you found this Q&A useful. Again, if you have any other questions, stick them in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to answer it, not only in the comment section, but I'll also stick it together in a... excuse me, that is my phone going. I will stick it in another Q&A like this, or even just an individual tutorial if necessary. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Chris Fold Training. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.